The galactic laughingstock. The vast expanse of space shimmered with the light of 1,000 stars, but on this day, all eyes were fixed on a small incoming fleet. The Galactic Council's War Command sat in their grand observation chamber, watching the screens with amused expressions. On the main display, a group of tiny ships approached the heavily defended sector of the Zargoth Dominion, one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy. The Zargoth fleet, a massive armada of dreadnoughts, battlecruisers, and heavily armed escort ships, stood ready, their weapons primed. The difference in size and numbers was almost comical. Admiral Threx, the supreme commander of the Zargoth forces, let out a loud guttural laugh. His sharp, reptilian fangs gleamed under the dim glow of the control room. "Is this a joke?" he scoffed, glancing at his officers. These insects call this a fleet." The room erupted in laughter. Even the lower-ranked soldiers monitoring the sensors couldn't help but chuckle. The largest human ship was barely a quarter the size of a standard Zargoth destroyer. Commander Vorn, Threx's second-in-command, grinned. "Shall we destroy them now, Admiral? One volley will be enough." Threx waved his hand dismissively. "Let them come. I want to see how long they last." The transmission from the tiny fleet finally came through. The voice was calm, steady, almost bored. "Final warning. Stand down or face the consequences." Silence filled the command room. Then, another burst of laughter. Threx wiped away a fake tear. "They are warning us." He turned to his officers. "They're serious." The laughing continued, but something strange was happening on the battlefield. The human ships did not slow down. They did not stop to exchange fire in traditional formations. They were speeding up, their engines burning brighter than expected. One of the Zargoth officers frowned, his 4 eyes scanning the incoming fleet's movements. "Admiral, their ships are accelerating. Their formation is erratic, no standard military pattern." Threx waved a hand. "Let them try. Their little metal toys will crumble before they even reach us." Vorn smirked. "Shall I prepare a single missile barrage?" "Save the missiles," Threx sneered. "A simple plasma volley will be enough to turn them into debris." On his command, the Zargoth warships unleashed a terrifying wave of plasma fire. The sheer energy from their attack lit up space like a supernova. The alien commanders watched with satisfaction, expecting the human ships to be vaporized on impact. But then, something impossible happened. The tiny human ships didn't just evade. They vanished. Threx blinked. "What? Impossible." An officer yelled. They just disappeared from our targeting systems." Suddenly, boom. One of the Zargoth escort ships exploded. A direct hit. From what? Another explosion. Then another. Human ships appeared out of nowhere, zigzagging unpredictably through the battlefield, dodging enemy fire with unnatural precision. Threx shot to his feet. "Where did they get speed?" Vorn's fingers shook as he tapped furiously at the control panel. They're using some kind of advanced thrust vectoring. Their engines, they shouldn't be able to maneuver like this. More Zargoth warships were hit, their hulls pierced by kinetic projectiles. These weren't energy-based weapons. They were simple, solid slugs traveling at insane velocities. The human fleet wasn't playing by the rules. Threx's rage turned into a gnawing sense of dread. "How are they penetrating our shields?" An officer stammered. "Their weapons, they are using mass drivers. Kinetic impact. Our energy shields are useless against them." Another boom. A massive Zargoth cruiser split apart as a single human railgun round tore through its core. Then came a new transmission from the human fleet. This time, there was no warning. "We told you to stand down." The Zargoth command room fell into stunned silence. These tiny human ships weren't weak. They were built for war. The first strike. The battlefield was chaos. The once mighty Zargoth fleet, confident in its overwhelming numbers, was now reeling in confusion. The tiny human ships, dismissed as mere insects, were tearing through their formations like a plague of unstoppable predators. Admiral Threx clenched his claws against the command console, his cold blood running hot with disbelief. How could this be happening? His fleet outnumbered the humans 20-1. His warships were larger, stronger, and armed with the most advanced plasma weapons in the galaxy. And yet, his ships were the ones exploding. The reality of human warships. The human fleet moved in a way that defied everything the Zargoth Empire understood about space combat. Where Zargoth dreadnoughts relied on sheer size and heavy energy shields, the humans used speed, unpredictability, and brutal efficiency. Where Zargoth battle cruisers engaged in predictable formations, the humans broke every rule of traditional warfare. The tiny ships danced between enemy lines, dodging plasma blasts with impossible precision, striking weak points with pinpoint accuracy. Then came the railguns, massive kinetic slugs traveling at near-light speed, each impact shredding through armor like paper. A Zargoth destroyer detonated into flames, its core reactor pierced straight through. Another battleship took a direct hit, collapsing in on itself, its hull cracking apart in a slow, fiery death. Threx's mind raced. This is not how wars are fought. His officers, once smug and overconfident, now sweated in terror. "Sir, we can't lock onto them," a technician stammered, his claws flying over his console. "They're using some kind of adaptive evasion. Their thrusters keep adjusting trajectory every microsecond." Threx growled. "Then fire blindly. Crush them with numbers." The Zargoth fleet did as commanded. A storm of plasma bolts filled the void, turning space into a burning hellscape. But the human ships didn't just dodge. They turned the enemy's own attacks against them. Somehow, impossibly, they anticipated every move. They twisted and weaved between incoming fire, allowing Zargoth plasma bolts to slam into their own ships. A nightmare unfolds. Commander Vorn, the second in command, turned pale as he stared at the tactical map. "Sir, they've cut through our formation. There." Boom! A Zargoth command carrier exploded. It wasn't a random ship. It was one of their core tactical command centers, specifically targeted by the humans. Vorn froze in horror. "They're not just attacking. They're dismantling us." Threx's claws dug into the console so hard that the metal bent beneath his grip. How had he been so blind? These humans, they weren't newcomers to war. They were masters of it. Human engineering. The true advantage. For years, the galactic races had looked down on humanity. They mocked their crude, metal warships, laughed at their lack of energy weapons, and sneered at their outdated kinetic weaponry. But now, the truth was clear. Humanity didn't build warships to fit the galactic standard. They built them to win. Their tiny ships were armored beyond reason, capable of taking multiple direct hits before failing. Their weapons, while simple in concept, were devastatingly effective, bypassing energy shields entirely. And worst of all, they fought dirty. A Zargoth battleship attempted to retreat, pulling back toward the safety of its battle group. Then, something appeared on its hull. A human boarding pod. The boarding assault. The Zargoth captain inside the battleship barely had time to react before the human boarding pod breached the hull with a sudden, brutal impact. KRAQOM. Metal tore apart, and a dozen human Marines stormed inside. They wore heavily armored suits, their movements swift and lethal. The Zargoth security forces opened fire, plasma bolts raining down on the intruders. But the humans didn't stop. They took the hits, absorbing the damage with their armor, and returned fire with ballistic rifles, solid metal rounds ripping through Zargoth flesh like wet paper. One human grabbed a Zargoth officer by the throat, lifting the alien into the air with terrifying ease. With a casual crack, he snapped the alien's neck and tossed the body aside. The remaining Zargoth soldiers panicked. This wasn't a war. This was an extermination. Panic in the fleet. Back on the command ship, Admiral Threx watched in horror as his ships fell apart. His once proud fleet, the strongest in the Dominion, was breaking. The humans weren't just winning. They were humiliating them. A distress signal went out from the Zargath War Command. Request immediate reinforcements. This is an emergency. But it was too late. The human ships had already moved to the heart of their formation. And now, the final phase of the battle was beginning. Threx turned to Vorn, his voice shaking. "Tell me we have a plan." Vorn gulped. We could deploy the dreadnoughts." Threx's eyes narrowed. It was a desperate move, but at this point, it was their only chance. With one final command, he ordered his greatest warships into the fight. Little did he know, the humans were already prepared, and they were just getting started. The truth about human ships. Admiral Threx clenched his claws around the control panel, his cold-blooded heart pounding in disbelief. His mighty war fleet, the pride of the Zargath Dominion, was crumbling before his eyes. The tiny human ships, once a laughingstock, were now unstoppable nightmares tearing through his forces like hungry beasts. This wasn't just a battle anymore. It was a massacre. The Zargath's fatal mistake. For centuries, the Zargath had ruled the stars with an iron fist. Their warships were monuments of power, gigantic, heavily armored, and protected by energy shields that could withstand nuclear strikes. Against any normal enemy, they would have been invincible. But today, they faced something entirely different. Human warships didn't rely on energy shields. They didn't stand still in grand formations, waiting to exchange fire like a ceremonial duel. They didn't play by galactic rules. Instead, they fought like predators. Fast, precise, and ruthless. Threx finally understood his mistake. The real strength of humanity wasn't in their ships. It was in their way of war. The reality of human warships. Commander Vorn gulped, scanning the incoming human vessels. Their ships weren't larger or more advanced than Zargath warships. They were smarter. 1. Armor over shields. While most galactic ships relied on energy shields, the humans had layered armor plating, which absorbed and deflected kinetic impacts. This meant they could take multiple direct hits and keep fighting. 2. Kinetic weaponry. Zargath warships used plasma cannons and energy-based weaponry designed to break through energy shields. But human ships had no shields, only heavy armor. Plasma blasts would scorch their hulls but not penetrate. Meanwhile, human railguns and mass drivers fired solid tungsten slugs at speeds so high that one hit could rip through an entire battleship. 3. Adaptive AI combat systems. Human ships weren't just piloted. They were controlled by AI-assisted targeting systems, allowing them to react to enemy movements in microseconds. This made their ships almost impossible to hit. Vorn's voice trembled. "Sir, they designed their ships specifically to counter fleets like ours." Threx's claws tightened. "That's impossible. They didn't even know we would attack them." Vorn swallowed. "Then that means they were prepared for anyone." A cold realization sank into Threx's mind. Humanity hadn't built warships to match the galaxy's military standards. They built them to destroy the standards. The dreadnought's last stand. Threx snarled, forcing himself to think logically. He still had one option left. The Zargath Dreadnought-class warships. These were planet-crushing juggernauts, each one the size of a small moon. They carried enough firepower to wipe out entire civilizations. Threx's claws trembled as he gave the order. "Deploy the dreadnoughts. Now." Vorn hesitated. "Sir, if we commit them." "Do it," Threx roared. Seconds later, the battlefield shifted. From the depths of space, 6 monstrous dreadnoughts emerged, their massive forms casting long shadows across the battlefield. Each one bristled with dozens of plasma cannons, ion disruptors, and heavy antimatter warheads. Vorn let out a breath of relief. They'll never break through those shields. For the first time in the battle, Threx felt a flicker of hope. The human response. But then, the human fleet responded, and all hope vanished. A new formation of human ships suddenly warped into position. These weren't the small attack craft they had been fighting before. These were the real warships, the human super dreadnoughts. And they were built for one thing only: obliteration. The Zargoth officers gasped in horror. The human ships were smaller than their own dreadnoughts, but their weapons were beyond comprehension. They didn't have plasma cannons. They didn't have energy lances. They had mass acceleration cannons the size of city blocks. One of the Zargoth officers choked. Whoa, what kind of ship carries a railgun that large? A simple message flashed across the battlefield. We warned you. Then, boom, a single human railgun round fired. The slug, twice the size of a starfighter, traveled so fast it broke through the fabric of space itself. The first Zargoth dreadnought exploded. Not just damaged, not just disabled, completely annihilated in a single hit. Threx's heart froze. This is impossible. The end of the battle. The remaining 5 Zargoth dreadnoughts panicked, trying to retreat, but the human super dreadnoughts pursued. Another boom. A second dreadnought was pierced straight through its core, splitting apart like paper. Boom. A third. Boom. A fourth. Threx could only watch in horror as his entire fleet was wiped from existence in a matter of minutes. His pride, his power, his legacy. Gone. Humanity hadn't just won. They had dominated. And the worst part, they had never even considered the Zargoth a real threat. They had fought the entire battle like it was just another exercise. A cold, cruel thought crept into Threx's mind. What if this wasn't even their full strength? The message to the galaxy. As the last remnants of the Zargoth fleet burned in the void, a transmission was sent to every major power in the galaxy. A single, simple message. You mocked our fleet. Now, you will never forget it. The entire galaxy shook in fear. Because if this was what humanity was capable of, then no empire would ever be safe again. The unstoppable blitz. The battle should have been over. But it wasn't. Because humanity wasn't done yet. The aftermath of annihilation. Admiral Threx stood frozen, his claws digging into the console. His fleet, his great empire's pride, had been shattered in minutes. 6 dreadnoughts, warships capable of destroying entire worlds, had been wiped out as if they were nothing. The surviving Zargoth ships were fleeing, their once fearless warriors now reduced to terrified cowards. And yet, the human fleet was still advancing. Not stopping. Not slowing down. Not even hesitating. No mercy for the mighty. Across the battlefield, hundreds of Zargoth ships broke formation, desperately trying to escape. Threx gasped as he saw it happen. The great Zargoth fleet, running like prey. Rear out all remaining ships. We must retreat to the homeworld. One of his officers stammered. Another shook his head. Sir, they're jamming our signals. Threx turned, eyes wide. What? They've disabled our long-range communication. The true horror of the situation settled in. This wasn't just a defeat. This was a trap. The humans hadn't beaten them. They had hunted them. Every ship that tried to escape was cut down instantly. No prisoners. No negotiations. No mercy. The human fleet's next move. At the center of the chaos, the human flagship, Erebus, stood silent and menacing. Unlike the sleek, elegant designs of most galactic warships, the Erebus was a monster of steel and brutality, a floating fortress of destruction. Inside its command center, Admiral Elias Carter watched the battlefield with calm, calculating eyes. His officers stood ready, waiting for his next order. Elias leaned forward. Begin Phase 2. A weapon unlike any other. Across the battlefield, human ships suddenly shifted their tactics. They stopped firing railguns. They stopped using standard weaponry. Instead, a new order was issued. Deploy the breakers. Within moments, hundreds of small black pods shot out from human ships, moving faster than the eye could track. For a brief second, the Zargath officers thought the humans had run out of ammo. Then the pods activated. They latched onto Zargath warships like leeches, drilling into their hulls in seconds. A few ships managed to shake some off, but most weren't so lucky. Then, the screaming began. The horror of the breakers. Inside the Zargath battleship Vorkarn, alarms blared. Captain Razgur growled, gripping the armrests of his command chair. "What in the Emperor's name is happening?" he roared. A panicked officer shouted, Something's inside the ship." A horrible screeching sound echoed through the corridors. Then, silence. Razgur's blood ran cold. "Security teams, report." No response. Then the lights flickered. Then the control screen shut down. Then the ship's artificial gravity failed, sending crew members floating helplessly. A new voice came through the ship's speakers. Not Zargath. Not human. Something else. System override complete. Razgur's eyes widened in terror. The ship's weapons turned on their own fleet. And before anyone could react, the Vorkarn opened fire on its own allies. The fall of the Zargath fleet. All across the battlefield, Zargath ships were being hijacked from the inside. The breakers, sophisticated AI infiltration drones, had disabled their systems, forcing their weapons to target their own forces. Zargath warships began firing on each other, unable to stop. Admiral Threx watched in horror as the fleet he once commanded destroyed itself. This is impossible," he whispered. One of his officers screamed, "They don't just fight battles. They steal them." For centuries, the Zargath had believed themselves to be invincible. But the humans had never believed in invincibility. They only believed in victory. The galactic broadcast. Across the galaxy, dozens of alien races watched as the Zargath fleet, the undefeated warlords of the stars, were completely obliterated. The battle had lasted less than an hour. A transmission was sent to every major power in the galaxy. It wasn't a message of peace. It wasn't a declaration of war. It was a warning. A single phrase appeared on screens across the universe. Never underestimate humanity. Silence fell across the galaxy. Because now, everyone knew the truth. The humans had never been weak. They had simply been waiting. The enemy's desperation. The Zargath Dominion, once the mightiest military force in the known galaxy, was on the brink of complete destruction. Their dreadnoughts had fallen. Their fleets had shattered. Their once unbreakable war machine had been turned into a graveyard of burning wreckage. Admiral Threx, the supreme commander of the Zargath forces, stood in stunned silence. His mind refused to accept what was happening. This wasn't war. This was extermination. The last stand of a dying empire. Across the battlefield, Zargath ships were in full retreat. It was disorderly, a chaotic scramble to escape the relentless human war machine. Only one last stronghold remained, the Grand War Fortress, Draskal, a massive planet-sized battle station. Draskal had served as the ultimate weapon of the Zargath Dominion for centuries. It had never fallen. It had never even been attacked. It was their final hope. Threx's clawed hand trembled as he activated the emergency beacon. All remaining Zargath forces fall back to Draskal. We make our stand here. The last remnants of his fleet turned, engines burning hot, racing toward the fortress. It was their only chance. Inside the war fortress, deep inside Draskal, Supreme Warlord Krovak watched the battle unfold on massive holoscreens. His scaled brow furrowed as he observed the relentless human fleet, still advancing, still unstoppable. Behind him, Zargath warlords, high-ranking officers, and strategists stood tense and silent. They had seen wars. They had wiped out civilizations. But this was something different. What do we know about their strategy? Krovak growled. One of the intelligence officers swallowed hard. "Sir, they don't have a strategy." The room fell silent. Krovak turned, his eyes narrowing. Explain. The officer took a shaky breath. They are adapting faster than we can calculate. Every time we counter, they adjust. They are learning at an impossible rate. Krovak's reptilian heart pounded. So we cannot predict their next move. The officer hesitated. Sir, at this rate, I think even they don't know their next move. They just react. That was when Krovak understood. The Zargath had spent centuries mastering war, perfecting their strategies, studying ancient battles, memorizing every possible outcome. But the humans didn't rely on ancient strategies. They fought like predators. Pure instinct, pure chaos, pure destruction. And worst of all, it worked. The doomsday plan. Krovak clenched his claws. Then we forced them into a predictable scenario. He turned to his generals. Prepare the doomsday cannon. The room went deathly silent. Even the war-hardened officers hesitated. Sir, you mean Toe? Yes, Krovak snarled. If we can't win this war, we end it on our terms. The doomsday cannon was Draskul's ultimate weapon, a planet-destroying plasma beam, capable of erasing entire star systems in seconds. Krovak's plan was simple. They would lure the humans in, and then fire the cannon at their fleet. Even humans wouldn't survive that. It was suicide. But it was the only option left. The trap is set. From the depths of space, the last remnants of the Zargath fleet reached Draskul, docking at the war fortress like wounded animals seeking shelter. Humanity did exactly as expected. They followed, preparing to deliver the final blow. Admiral Elias Carter, aboard the Erebus, observed the enemy's retreat. They're running, his second-in-command said. Do we pursue? Elias nodded, his expression calm. They're not running, he muttered. They're baiting us. The galactic superweapon activates. Inside Draskul, alarms blared as the doomsday cannon powered up. Gargantuan plasma coils hummed with deadly energy, channeling enough destructive force to shatter the very fabric of space. Krovak watched the human fleet approach. He smirked. They have no idea, he whispered. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8. The cannon's charge reached 90% power. 7. The humans continued forward, unaware of the trap. 6. The cannon reached full charge. 5. The human fleet was in range. 4. Krovak's claws clenched. Victory was moments away. 3. A single transmission from the humans came through. You should have surrendered. 2. Krovak blinked. Wait, why did they send that? 1. The cannon fired. The impossible happens. A monstrous beam of plasma erupted from Draskul, expanding across space at unimaginable speed. The human fleet, right in its path, vanished. Krovak's smirk widened. We've done it. Then, the alarms blared. Sir, something's wrong. Krovak turned sharply. What? A technician shouted in panic. The cannon. It's overloading. The warlords turned back to the screen, only to realize the horror before them. The humans hadn't been destroyed. They had moved. At the last possible moment. The human fleet had somehow calculated the exact trajectory of the doomsday cannon and dodged it. And now, the superweapon's unstable energy was turning against them. Draskul's core began to rupture. Its reactor overloaded. The warlords screamed. No, no, shut it down. But it was too late. Draskul exploded. A blinding light consumed the Zargath's last hope. The great war fortress, undefeated for millennia, was reduced to dust. The final moments of the Zargath Empire. On his flagship, Admiral Threx watched his home burn. The warlords were dead. The fleet was gone. And now he was alone. A final transmission came from the human fleet. This is not personal. This is the price of arrogance. The screen went dark. A moment later, Threx's ship was erased from existence. The message to the galaxy. The fall of the Zargath Dominion was broadcast across the entire galaxy. For centuries, the Zargath had ruled without fear. But now, the message was clear. Humanity had arrived, and no empire would ever mock them again. Humanity's true power. The Zargath Dominion was no more. Its mighty fleets, once the terror of the stars, had been erased. Its unbreakable war fortress, Draskell, had fallen. And now, the galaxy stood in silence, watching, waiting, because for the first time in history, they feared humans. The aftermath of total annihilation. Across the galactic network, species that had once mocked humanity's tiny fleet now whispered in horror. Every major empire, every warlord, every planetary ruler, all of them had watched the Zargath Dominion crumble. The Zargath had been the strongest, the most ruthless, the most feared. And yet, they had lasted less than a day against the humans. This was not just a war. It was a demonstration. The Galactic Council reacts. On the core world of Veldoria, where the Galactic Council convened, the leaders of countless species sat in stunned silence. The enormous chamber, once filled with heated debates and political posturing, was now deathly quiet. No one spoke. No one moved. No one dared to breathe. Because on the massive central display, they were watching the final moments of the Zargath Empire. The explosion of Draskell. The retreating Zargath remnants, hunted down one by one. The final transmission from humanity. We do not start wars. We end them. A trembling council member, a feline-like being from the Veltran Republic, finally broke the silence. What? What have we done? Another, a multi-limbed diplomat from the Tarkish consortium, whispered, "We treated them like children, like a primitive species. But they were never weak." A reptilian envoy from the Drakenar clans muttered. His scales trembled with unease. "We were fools to ever think so." High Chancellor Veltorek, an elder of the Grand Assembly, closed his eyes. He had lived for over 1,000 years. He had seen wars that reshaped entire civilizations, but never had he witnessed something like this. With a deep, trembling breath, he finally spoke. "We must send a message," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "A message?" One of the younger diplomats asked. "To whom?" Veltorak looked up, his expression grave. "To Earth." The entire chamber tensed. Never before had the Galactic Council directly addressed humanity. But now, they had no choice. Inside the Human War Council, far from the eyes of the galaxy, deep within the heart of the human fleet, Admiral Elias Carter stood aboard the Erebus. The battle was over. His officers were still monitoring the remains of the battlefield, scanning for any possible survivors. There were none. The Zargath were gone. And now, Carter had a choice to make. His second-in-command, Commander Lena Valdez, turned to him. "Admiral, we've received a transmission from the Galactic Council." Carter didn't respond immediately. He simply stared out the massive viewport, watching as his fleet reassembled, moving like an unstoppable war machine. Finally, he exhaled. "Put it through." The holographic display flickered to life, revealing High Chancellor Veltorak of the Galactic Council. The old diplomat's face was strained, tired. "Admiral Carter," he began, his tone carefully measured. "On behalf of the Galactic Council, I wish to offer an understanding." Carter raised an eyebrow. "An understanding?" Veltorak hesitated. We underestimated you. Your people. Your military. You mocked us." Carter interrupted, his voice even. "You ignored us. You let the Zargath wipe out our colonies, slaughter our civilians. And now, only after we've reduced them to dust, do you seek understanding." A heavy silence followed. Veltorak swallowed. We did not realize the full extent of your strength." Carter's expression didn't change. "That," he said, "was your first mistake. Veltorek hesitated before asking the question the entire galaxy was now desperate to know. What will humanity do next? Carter finally smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It wasn't a warm smile. It was cold, calculated. He stepped forward, hands behind his back, and delivered the words that would shake the foundations of the galaxy. That depends entirely on you. The fear spreads. The Galactic Council's transmission was leaked. Within hours, it spread across every corner of the galaxy. Civilizations panicked. Some, like the Veltran Republic, immediately declared humanity an ally, offering peace treaties and trade agreements. Others, like the Tarkish Consortium, pulled their fleets back, afraid to challenge humanity. And then, there were the ones who didn't learn. Deep in the Outer Rim, in the shadowed halls of the Craxus Dominion, warlords gathered. They had seen what humanity had done. They had seen the destruction, the power, the terror. But they were not afraid. They were intrigued. For if humanity could defeat the Zargeth so easily, then perhaps they could do the same to the rest of the galaxy. One warlord, his red eyes glowing in the darkness, leaned forward. Humanity has revealed its strength. A wicked grin spread across his face. Now let's see if they can hold it. The future of the galaxy, Earth had sent a message, and the galaxy had heard it loud and clear. But this was only the beginning. The true test was still to come. Because now, every empire, every kingdom, every warlord in the cosmos would either fear humanity or seek to challenge it. And the next war would decide the fate of the entire galaxy. The aftermath and humanity's warning. The battle had ended. But the war had just begun. The silence after the storm. Across the wreckage of what was once the Zargeth Dominion's invincible fleet, human warships drifted in perfect formation. The battlefield was quiet now, save for the distant hum of engines and the occasional burst of static over the fleet's communication network. In every direction, Zargeth warships, what remained of them, floated lifelessly, their hulls torn open, their crews gone. The once mighty war machine that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries had been reduced to ash. And yet, despite this overwhelming victory, there was no celebration aboard the Erebus. Admiral Elias Carter stood on the bridge, gazing at the carnage before him. His officers remained silent, their faces grim. They had won. But something felt wrong. It was too easy. The final transmission. A signal cut through the silence. A single transmission. It came from the fringes of the battlefield, where a heavily damaged Zargeth vessel drifted aimlessly. Carter narrowed his eyes. Patch it through. The holoscreen flickered, revealing the battered and bloodied face of Supreme Warlord Krovak. The once mighty ruler of the Zargeth Dominion was barely alive. His scales burned, his armor cracked. His once arrogant and fearsome expression was now one of pure, cold hatred. He coughed, dark blood spilling from his mouth. And then he laughed. Not in amusement, not in madness, but in knowing. You think you've won, Krovak rasped, his voice a mixture of pain and venom. Carter remained silent, watching the alien's final moments with measured patience. Krovak's breathing was labored, but his eyes burned with something Carter had seen before. The look of a man who had lost everything, but still believed in something. You think you have conquered us, Krovak continued, voice barely above a whisper. But you don't understand what you've done. Carter finally spoke. His voice was calm, controlled. I understand that the Zargeth Dominion is no more. Krovak gave a weak, bitter chuckle. The Dominion was only a piece of the puzzle. A single piece. Carter's eyes narrowed. Explain. The warlord's broken lips curled into a smile. You have forced the galaxy to make a choice, Krovak whispered. They will either bow, or they will unite. A chill passed through the room. Carter didn't react, but deep down, he knew the warlord's words were not a bluff. The destruction of the Zargeth Dominion was not just a victory for humanity. It was a message to the entire galaxy. and the galaxy had heard it, loud and clear. Krovak coughed again, his body failing him. His breath came in ragged gasps, but he managed one final sentence. "Run, human." The screen cut to black, and Krovak, the last ruler of the Zargoth Dominion, was gone. The warning from Earth. Hours later, the Galactic Council's emergency session was called. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered in a panicked frenzy, debating their next move. Some screamed for an alliance against Earth, arguing that if humanity was not stopped now, they would dominate the stars. Others pleaded for peace, warning that any war against humans would end the same way the Zargoth did, in fire and blood. One thing was certain. The status quo was shattered. Humanity was no longer a minor race. They were the deciding force in the galaxy. And then, another unexpected event occurred. A transmission. From Earth. The entire chamber fell silent as the message played. Admiral Elias Carter appeared on the screen. His expression was neutral, his voice steady, but his words carried the weight of 1,000 battles. "This is a message to all civilizations of the galaxy." He paused for a moment. Then, with absolute certainty, he spoke the words that would change history forever. "Humanity does not seek war. We do not seek conquest. But note this: if you challenge us, if you threaten our people, our homes, or our worlds, we will not fight like an empire. We will fight like a species that has spent its entire existence surviving extinction. We will fight like a species that has fought against itself for thousands of years and emerged stronger. We will fight like the predators you have just witnessed, and we will end you." The message cut off. Silence. The leaders of the Galactic Council sat in their chambers, unable to breathe, unable to speak, because they knew, deep in their souls, that was not a threat. That was a promise. The galaxy's choice. In the days that followed, the galaxy was divided. Some species, like the Veltran Republic and the Arcuri clans, immediately allied themselves with Earth, recognizing that humanity's strength was not something to oppose, but to stand beside. Others, like the Tarkish Consortium and the Ulzari Empire, withdrew their fleets, avoiding provocation and choosing neutrality. But there were those who refused to accept reality. The Kraxis Dominion, an empire of brutal warlords, saw humanity's display of power not as a warning, but as an invitation, a challenge. And in the dark corners of the galaxy, an alliance was forming, one that would seek to do what the Zargoth could not, to strike first, and to destroy humanity before it became unstoppable. The stage was set. A war was coming, and this time, it would not be against one empire. It would be against the entire galaxy. The beginning of a new era. Admiral Elias Carter stood aboard the Erebus, watching as his fleet prepared for the inevitable. Earth had made its statement. Now, it was time to see who listened. A faint smirk crossed his lips. "Let them come," he muttered, because humanity had always been outnumbered. It had always been hunted, threatened, underestimated. And yet, through it all, it had always survived. And now, it was time to prove it. One last time. The war for the galaxy had just begun.